It's 5:31. That's called the May 29th ACWD Special Board Meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Director Zakbari. Directors Gunther.
Here.
Director Sethy.
Here.
Director Weed.
Here.
Director Huang.
Here, Director Gunther, would you lead us in the salute to the flag?
Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America.
And
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. General Manager Stevenson, I believe you have some housekeeping remarks.
I do. I just want to welcome everybody's participation in our workshop this afternoon. My name is Ed Stevenson and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public participating in person may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda, staff reports, and presentation materials are all available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This hybrid board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. Again, thank you all for attending, and that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Thank you. Next is public comments on matters on this notice of special meeting. Members of the public may address the board on any issues that are listed on the agenda. There'll be a 5-minute time limit. Members of the public who wish to address the board on scheduled agenda items will also be given the opportunity to do so when the item is discussed. I do not see any members of the public attending in person. Can we verify that there is no one online, or is there anybody?
There is a participant online who's identified themselves very accurately with a staff person's name, so I believe that is not a member of the public.
All right. All right, with that, then I will close the public comment period. Then let's move on to the Water Resources Planning Workshop, please.
Okay, we continue on with this series of workshops. This is actually the fourth in a series of workshops planned for calendar years 2024 and 2025. And I think the second this calendar year that are focusing on the planning for long-term management of the district's water resources in the face of climate change, evolving regulations, declining availability of water supplies, new water supply alternatives, and other factors using an integrated resources planning approach. This workshop builds upon previous workshops conducted in 2022 and 2023. And right now, I think I'll just turn it over to our Director of Water Resources to get us started, Ms. Heides.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevenson. The team is pleased to be here today to provide the latest update on our water resources master planning effort. The team has been busy at work since our last meeting on a number of things that you're going to hear about today. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Thomas Nizer, our water supply and planning manager, who will
Just double checking the
Testing.
sound here.
Okay.
Sound all right.
Is this one working? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Would you like to start slide deck, please? Great. Good evening. We can move to the next slide. As introduced, this is our next workshop in the series. I'm not going to spend much time here. I think we know most of the players. I will call special attention. Well, we have our return characters: Persephone, St. Charles, St. James, Philippe Daniel of Laquisti. And I'd like to reintroduce our new project manager, Mr. Chris Hughes. Director Sethy, I think you missed the last workshop. So Chris Hughes has been filling in for Katie Cole, who delivered a beautiful baby girl on April 10th, I believe it was. Well, 10th or 8th. It was the day off from my birthday. I don't remember which, positive or negative. So with further ado, I'd like to welcome the team.
It's my pleasure to be here, directors and everyone, to give you the latest on where we're at and get some input as we move forward in our process. It's great to see you all again. You have a couple handouts, I think, and this is just a reminder of, what's sort of the common goals and planning objectives that we're keeping close to us as we go through each steps of this process. So feel free to reference them as we're going through some of the material today, because I'm going to be alluding to some of them of how we're bringing those goals into our process today. So you'll have those as handouts as we go along. So there's the goals and then there's the planning objectives. These are all ones that you should have seen before, but it's always nice to have it as a handout as a reminder. All right, so here's the acronyms that we're going to be using in this presentation for your reference. So today our objectives are really focused on presenting sort of the future condition analysis that we did. We did a baseline study and we're going to share that with you. And then we also want to talk about, based on that, how we're starting to build supply portfolios to address what we're seeing in that baseline analysis. And what we'd love to have as today is to get your input on those, what we're calling initial portfolio concepts. These are not fully baked ideas because we wanted to come and get your input at the beginning of the process instead of at the end. And so that's what we're looking for today, is some input on that. And so we look forward to that. Just as to orient you on where we've been and where we're going, this is our pathway that we've had starting in phase 1 and going all the way through phase 2. But you see in the red font, we are here, spring, summer of 25. Welcome to portfolio building. And that's the stage of the project that we're at right now. When we see you again, we're going to be focusing more on what were the evaluation results of those portfolios. And we're going to be talking about trade-offs of those portfolios and getting into some of the decision making around what pathway you want to have after we're done with the planning. So that should be an exciting meeting that we have coming up. So this is another way to look at where progress is. You can see this is a calendar that we show, a work plan calendar and schedule that we show every time we do one of these workshops. And you'll see that we're sort of in this late May place. And we're in this portfolio themes and building, and this is that, you see the circle that's up there under board meetings that's being bisected. So that's where we are, and that's where we're supposed to be. So as we get into the meat of the agenda, we're going to be, as I said, providing this baseline reliability analysis. We're going to talk about what we've done thus far and describe sort of this portfolio building process that we've alluded to in previous meetings, but we're going to dig a little deeper in that. We're going to present some initial portfolio concepts and themes, and then we're going to have a facilitated discussion with Philippe, who's going to come up as our facilitator, and we're going to allow you all to ask questions and provide input, and he's going to facilitate that discussion for us. And then we'll close with sort of where are we heading after here and next steps. All right. So when we say we're doing a baseline analysis, what we're really looking at is it's a modeling exercise in a lot of ways. And we want to say, okay, if you did nothing moving forward and you had the same supplies that you have now and the same infrastructure, what would it look like in the future? The future is uncertain. We don't know what the future looks like. So we've created 3 potential future condition scenarios that we want to test that base case against. So you'll see those as the green boxes up top here. We have at one end of the spectrum what we call scenario A, which is sort of a mild condition. And then it moves to moderate, scenario B, and then more severe is scenario C. And you'll see along there that we've got sort of the differences between these. So the top 3 arrows that you see are common categories that happen when we're talking about climate change and the potential for climate change. So we would over time be seeing, between the scenarios, we would be seeing decreasing average precipitation. This plan, I'll note now, is through 2050, right? So we're looking at these conditions of what could be a mild condition in 2050, a moderate condition in 2050, or a severe condition in 2050. And so that decreasing average precipitation is really that we're saying under each of these different scenarios, that's what's going down. It's not going down over time. It's just each one of these scenarios has less and less average precipitation. But conversely, right, we know that because of the weather patterns and climate change analysis, that although average precipitation is going down, there's an understanding that the intensity of when precipitation does occur is going to be more intense. So as you move from scenario A to scenario C, you're seeing an increase in precipitation intensity. Similarly, with sea level rise, you're seeing in scenario A a more mild, moderate, and then more severe impact. So those three are sort of the climate change, right? These are external factors that are influencing what your potential future could be. The orange is now we wanted to look at differences in semi-tropic deliveries. And so we had different assumptions as to what those might look like under a mild, a moderate, and a severe condition. So you see that's actually going down. As we go most severe, we're making the assumption that those deliveries are going to be decreasing. The final bar that we have here is a yes-no sort of situation, right? For the first two, scenario A and B, we're assuming that there will be state water project carryover through the San Luis Reservoir. And then for scenario C, we're assuming that that does not occur. Another note here is about demands. Because this is 2050 and because you've agreed to meet the urban water use objectives, we're holding demands pretty static across these scenarios because we kind of know what that's going to be. It's not really influencing our future condition. So another thing to point out here is scenario C, we call it severe, but it's probably potential, but not probably for until way past 2050, right? So the types of things that we're looking at under scenario C will actually help us in thinking about what the future after 2050 might look like. And so instead of just discounting it and saying that it might be severe and it's not really realistic, we wanted to look at it so that you're prepared for what could be after 2050 as well. And so all of this is built into the model, which TAN has done and looked at, and we said, okay, let's run our base case analysis, current supplies, current infrastructure against these three different potential future conditions. And so let's see what we get. Okay, this is what we get. So I'm going to take a minute to explain this graph because there's a lot going on here. So you see in the title, it says base case may not meet 2050 reliability thresholds. That's the end message, right, of why we're bothering to do portfolios in the first place. What are we seeing that tells us that? If you look at the axes, right, if you look at the y-axis, on one side you've got annual shortage in percentage, and on the other side it's mirrored with annual shortage in acre feet. Then you have three categories that correspond to the three scenarios that I just told you about. You have scenario A, which is a mild case, scenario B, sort of a mid case, and scenario C, which is a more severe case. So what you see are clusters of essentially bar charts that represent a year. Each time you see a bar at a different height, that's a year. And each time you see a bar, it's saying that when we modeled it under these conditions, we had a delta, a difference between supply and demand. What you see there is also how severe is that difference, right? Where we have a supply gap. What we're saying is this red dashed line, that's the agreed upon reliability threshold, where you're saying that, okay, some years we may have, a little bit of a shortage, but we really don't want to see it above a 10% shortage. So we've got the frequency and the number of bars that you see, and then we also have the intensity of the shortage, which is the height of the bars that you see. And the thing that we're paying attention to is how many years, when we model 100 years in 2050, different types of hydrologic cycles in 2050, with these assumptions on future conditions layered in, how many years do we get above that 10% reliability threshold? You'll see for scenario A, that's 0. That's why we have 0 to 100 years there. So you could look at that and you could say, all right, under a mild future condition, what we're doing right now should be adequate, right? Over the long haul, right? So we'd say, okay, we've got some shortages, but none of them are exceeding this 10%. But then when you go to scenario B, right, as we're adding in this future, more severe future conditions, you see now we're at 2. 2 of those years, we have more years that have a gap, and now we've got 2 that are in excess of that reliability threshold. You go to C, which is the most severe, and now we're at 5, and we also have more years where you're just under that reliability threshold. So when Thomas said, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve, right? When we're thinking about why would we do anything different? It's really looking at these reliability thresholds because we don't know what the future is going to hold. So maybe we should look at some other options for how you're building your supply portfolio in the future to help address some of this potential future lack of reliability. And so with that as the guide, that's how we started building the portfolios as to why we're bothering to say that you need to do anything other than what you're doing right now. So when I say the baseline analysis, the first portfolio we built is called our base case portfolio. And this is what one of our portfolios looks like. And you're going to see this repeated throughout our presentation when we talk about some of these other portfolios that would be in difference to this one. So this is about what you are on an average basis. And let's say this is in 2050 because you haven't done anything different, right? So you can see that you've got a mix, and it's almost somewhat of an even mix between water that's coming from SFPUC, water that's coming from the State Water Project, groundwater, and then also some local surface water. So we call this that's what we're testing the baseline, and we call this our base case portfolio or status quo. And so you can see that what it also reflects is that it's direct use. There's no distinction of whether it's direct or recharge. It's all baked in here. Recharge for pumping in the same year, and also use of stored water that you would need to produce in order to meet demand. Okay, any questions about that? Because I would like to go now into sort of the portfolio building process to show you what we did to build on that and difference, but I can answer any questions if you have about the baseline.
On your last chart, what showed is the groundwater there, local groundwater, the Niles cone,
Mm-hmm.
not groundwater that we're parking water in the valley.
Right. So I think in this case, right, that State Water Project, because we're viewing that as sort of that unit of
Well,
water.
SWP is a separate project here, but
Mhm.
when I look at local surface
Mhm.
water and groundwater, that's really the recharge of the surface water recharging it. So those two could actually be one.
Yeah, anytime you use, your point is well taken. Anytime you say groundwater, it's kind of this nebulous thing because it could be groundwater coming out or groundwater coming in, and the surface is always recharging, right? The groundwater.
But
Let me clarify.
That's
that.
the-
Local surface water is Lake Del Val surface water supply. Groundwater is the
see.
recharge, the deep percolation from rain, as well as our diversions. State Water Project is project water.
Mhm.
Table A, current year, returned semi-tropic, or state water we put into the ground.
It looks like this fits into generally into the 40%, 40% local surface water supply, 40% state water project, and 20% HHE. We're not changing those formulas,
No,
and those two really are interactive.
that's correct. Yep. Yeah, thanks for making that comment. It's good to know that and point that out.
Any other questions from the board? No? Okay.
All right, so portfolio building process. We've showed this slide before. This is sort of overall when we say what a portfolio is, right? We had come last time when we talked about supply options and their individual projects. And then we took sort of the list of 44 and we basically went in and compiled some of them that are sort of similar concepts and got it down to 24. We talked about portfolio themes. We started developing some themes, which is sort of the spirit of what the portfolio might be focused on doing. And then we take some of those supply options and we start putting in those folders of those themes, and then we do analysis and refinement. So at this point, we're just starting with sort of block units of water. And once we go in and put it in the model, we'll be able to refine what those actual volumes would be more likely under those future condition scenarios. So right now, we're just playing around with sort of basic blocks of water to develop these initial portfolio concepts. So how does this work in more detail at the stage that we're on at this moment? First, we created a base case theme. We talked about that, all right? Then we had actually a really great workshop with staff. What we did is called a portfolio building workshop. And recognizing that, not all the staff that was there is super comfortable with doing this exercise. It's not something they do on the regular. They were good sports and did it with us because I think a lot of it is about really understanding what are these options, how this portfolio building works. So it's semi-educational for staff that aren't used to that, But it also gave us some actually really good input that we could use to start thinking through of how we could build these portfolios. So they gave us some really great seeds. So from that, we created some initial concepts. And then now we're here at step 4, where we're the board review of those initial concepts. And we have time and energy to create more concepts based on the input that you have today. But it's basically just to kind of get us going. Put something in front of you, see what you think, and see where else we can go with this. And then finally, on the 5th step there, like I said, we're going to model and refine these concepts, these portfolios, so that they become synergistic with each other. We'll be able to find out how they'd work in concert with each other through the model. We can evaluate those key trade-offs, and then we'll come back when it's time to select a preferred portfolio pathway. So I mentioned, I think since last time, we've had actually a lot of great input. I mentioned the extended team portfolios, which you see here is on March 12th. But we've also had a lot of good input along the way since we were last here in the late winter and early spring from interested parties, where we talked about conservation in concert with the water use efficiency program that you're developing. We talked about watershed stewardship and some of the strategies. And remember, while we're focused today on the supply options, we also have another list of strategies that may not necessarily yield a unit of water to build a portfolio, but there are things that we want to consider as potential items that we could add to what your pathway may be moving forward. And then also on community and equity. So we had really great interested party input. We then had our extended team portfolio workshop, and then we had follow-up after that workshop to really get in as we were characterizing some of these concepts, to meet with a lot of the subject matter experts that you have here as staff at the district to add finer points and to better understand some of these after they survive the portfolio workshop that we put them through. All right. So now here comes the initial portfolio concepts and themes. So when we say initial, I'm going to reiterate this again and again, right? When we say it's an initial portfolio concept, the key words here are initial, that's where we are today, and conceptual, right? That's where we are in the process. So you can see it's really about us starting to kind of package things and finding our way of like what's making sense, what's resonating. And the examples that we're giving you here today are meant to be built upon. They could be altered in some way, or we can create new examples of this. But the one thing I want you all to understand is it's not a fully baked portfolio. None of these, we're not asking you to say, hey, I like this portfolio, or I like that portfolio, or we should get rid of this one. We want to look at everything. So really our focus now is, are we looking at everything, so that when we do the evaluation, we can look at all the ideas. So we don't need you to decide that today. But you know, if you're compelled to tell us anyway, we're here. We're here to hear that. Because we do want feedback as we go and finish our portfolio building process. So I mentioned that we had this portfolio building workshop. And so it was kind of a fun place for us to start, where we looked at and we said, okay, based on that workshop, what were some of the projects that kept reappearing and reappearing and reappearing in what the staff were building? Let's see if there's some, consistency there and some thematic nature there. And there was. What we came back and we said, wow, some of the no-brainer stuff is to really make sure that you're fully expanding what you have locally in groundwater. And that made a lot of sense to us as planners. So we said, okay, let's use that as the starting place and let's build a portfolio around that and see what it looks like. So we call this theme extended team input, but what it's really saying is let's expand local groundwater first, all right? So these are all relatively implementable options that are in here. You see in the bold here where we start teeing, here's where we're starting to tee into some of the water resources goals and planning objectives that you all had mapped out as guidelines for this project. So affordability, right? This is something that, most of these options are pretty affordable, right? And so, so there's that part of it. But then the other part here, right, is because it's pretty minimal in what we're doing, you'll notice while there is an uptick in local surface and groundwater in order to do the recharge, you'll see that we still have a good chunk of SFPUC water. State water project has been kept static. And so there's not too much movement on imported water. So we said, all right, well, this is one, because I think as we're going through this, remember, we're not looking to fill a gap, right? There's no gap in the future that you need to go and find all these supplies to meet demand. What we're looking for is reliability, right, across the years. And we're also looking for all the other criteria that that the evaluation criteria that you knew were going to be important. So one of the questions we have as we build these portfolios is how much imported water do we actually build against, right? And so we can have variability there. This one, as you'll see, is one level. If we go to the next one, we said, okay, well, let's really amp up groundwater and see if we were to fully maximize groundwater with all the different options that we had in our tool chest. How would that look with being able to get off of State Water Project or SFPUC water? Because that's really the thing that you're moving there. And so we did, and this is what this looks like. You can see groundwater grows substantially, and now State Water Project is coming down. And we're kind of holding SFPUC a little bit before we completely get rid of it, right? So there's definitely benefits to having it. So we said, okay, let's even those out a little bit. So what you'll see that gets added that really advances the ball on groundwater here is investing in maximizing groundwater desalination. That adds a big chunk of extra groundwater in there by putting in that option. So what's nice about this is because now you're fully maximizing the groundwater within your service area that's within your control, local control goes up, right? So now you're having a lot more control over your supplies and less dependence on imported supplies, which is, you know, a lot of under the auspices of other people, right? So you've got to deal with whatever's going on with the State Water Project. It's less in your control. PUC less in your control, but you see it. There's still some dependence on imported supplies.
Where is the extra local surface water coming in?
So that is, let's see. You guys know which one in particular that is? I think, you know, we're trying to keep it kind of a high level discussion. So I think a lot of that is probably bringing in extra local surface water in as well as groundwater. So additional stormwater capture, there you go. All right. So then we said, okay, let's kind of get off the groundwater train and let's think about something in a completely different way. Let's think about operational complexity. If we were to look at, you know, how complicated is the system going to be run in the future, and what would be sort of the makeup of things that would help to simplify? And so shoring up the existing system is one way of doing that, and also giving other people the responsibility to manage some of those supplies. So there's where you see that extra unit of new kind of imported water that's not from your existing system. So it could come from any other place, but it would be a new storage external to your system. And so we're not designating where that's coming from or how that's coming from at this point, but we're just saying, hey, you know, there could be some extra unit out there and you could add it instead of subtracting it. But it's coming in a different way than what you're normally. It's being stored in a different way than how you're doing it right now. So here you see that we're maintaining current operations, and that's a way of minimizing operational complexity. But yet we're keeping, and so in some ways you could look at it as, because we're doing that, we're keeping benefits from external agency operations, right? So this increases the reliance on external facilities and supplies for storage, because we're saying, hey, instead of us doing it, it would be a lot simpler if you did some of this, right? So it's a different way of looking at it. And there's pros and cons again to all of this, but you can kind of see how that's shifting if we think about it that way. And again, you know, this could be one way to minimize operational complexity, and you could have a whole other way to do this too, because there's lots of moving pieces. So the next two, we said, okay, let's focus on current, like some of the things that we talked about in the goals and objectives. One of it was, you said, regional leadership. That's one of the goals that you have. All right, so if we were to focus in on regional leadership or providing regional benefits, what would be the best thing for the region, right? Not necessarily, you know, what's the best thing for ACWD, but, you know, you're going to be a regional leader, you're going to do great things for the region. So we said, all right, well, the first thing is the more water that you develop and bring in locally, and produce locally, that's going to benefit the whole region. So let's double down. Now you see recycled water on a large scale coming in. That's a partnership project that will come in. You also now see this idea of exploring bay water desal, which would be a regional project that you'd have regional partners on. And now you see, look, if you did all of this, right, you could essentially say, well, we don't need the state water project and SFPUC water anymore. That can be made for other people because we're going to be taking this water. That's one way of looking at it. So you can see here, there's limits on institutional independence, right? So now you're kind of giving away a lot of control, right, by doing something like this. But you are doing a great benefit, and maybe you'd have a lot of partners in these projects that would help cost share and funding and all those good things that come along with being a regional leader. So this is not to say this is something you would do again. This is just to point out, if you were to focus in this direction and you really double down on it, this is what it would look like potentially. My final portfolio theme for you is similar to this, but it's a stewardship focus. You have a goal in there that a watershed stewardship. So if we were to look at what are all the kinds of projects that from a watershed stewardship standpoint might really resonate, right? So you've got things like, you'll see on top there, this extra yellow conservation. You're already planning to do a lot of conservation already to meet your urban water use objectives that are already included in your urban water use plan. We know that's happening. But, you know, there is a little bit more you could do when we were doing this analysis. You could do some other things and go above and beyond. And so this is that extra like above and beyond. So you'd be exceeding your urban water use objectives by adding in this extra layer of conservation. Of course, we see recycled water, right? So this is improving water quality, minimizing wastewater effluent, minimizing water waste. You have local surface, you have groundwater, and so you're reducing now state water project and SFPUC by adding in these kinds of projects. All right, so that's everything that we're going to present to you tonight. Now, except for the next steps at the end, now is the time for discussion. And so if you have questions or anything like that, Philippe is going to facilitate and I'll try to help out where I can.
So what we really want to get from you is obtain your input on the portfolios we're considering. And if there's any tweaks we want to the kind of composition, we have a variety of asset classes here that we've talked about, different mixtures. We want to see if we need to kind of alter that. The second thing is we're going to be coming back in August with these finalized portfolios and the evaluation of them. And they will present some trade-offs. And so we want to understand which trade-offs are going to be of the greatest significance for you. Are there any things you want to make sure that we characterize in better detail? For instance, there's going to be very different kind of risk of local projects versus kind of out of area projects. How do we capture the risk of partners or local partners as opposed to our state and federal partners? So I think we want to work with you on that. So before we jump into that, are there any particular questions just about the content of these 6 portfolios or 5 portfolios we've shown you? Is there any clarification you want from the technical team on these portfolios?
You don't have to answer this question right now, but I would be interested in knowing how you would capture stormwater that would be beneficial.
So the question is how the mechanism for stormwater capture and then associated yields and cost. Mhm.
I would assume that will happen in your detailed analysis,
Yeah.
right? So today we'll talk about concept, but I would hope that you'll come back in August with the actual details, because what you're proposing right now is very high level conceptual. I can see a lot in it with some of the options and I would like to understand it.
Yeah.
But I'll wait till August for that.
I know how they do it like down in Orange County and other places, but I'd like to know specifically for our service area, how would we do it and what the cost would be? And
Yeah,
Director Wu?
noted. Director Gunther then, oh, sorry.
I have a thought and I'll follow up on later. I'll give you a comment on how to capture stormwater fairly efficiently and effectively, which is Alameda Creek. Director Wu?
Mm-hmm.
I have a thought and I'll follow up on later. Give you a comment on how to capture stormwater fairly efficiently and effectively, which is Alameda Creek.
Mm-hmm.
Which is Alameda Creek. First of all, this is a relatively short-term planning process, 25 years. It would be helpful to include a chart or page of what you're not addressing, longer-term options that we have potentially available to us. That includes more on the bay water. You have bay water desalination in here. That's an unlimited supply. Then I made the point earlier that AI is going to give us cheap power because we're going to have nuclear power plants throughout the state, and we're going to have, and it'll no longer be the design consideration. Second, I'd hope you'd have a chart on contingency water supplies and how we would address the contingency situations where we lose one or more of our major water sources, and how we would get by for that 6 month to a year time frame if when we have an earthquake. That I think would fit into the shorter term. I would delete the word recycled from this short term. We've kicked it out as far as we can. It's not cost effective. We know in the next 25 years, recycled water is not an economically or desirable, and it's also a water quality issue with PFAS. Recycled water is a de novo generator of PFAS. So hopefully we can eliminate that in its entirety from our near-term planning. I would hope in our longer-term plans, we would put in there, and we can, if you put a dotted line on a map, you get the same effect as a project when it comes to some of the longer-term implications. Get out of natural stream conveyance. Avoid it at all costs. Get out of Alameda Creek. From a water's supply standpoint, try and capture the water farther north and bring it in, possibly through the Niles Canyon Aqueduct with San Francisco.
And that's because of the risk and reliability considerations?
You have the environmental risk, the regulatory risk.
Yeah.
We've spent $100 million on an award-winning folly with our rubber dams, which are currently not, one of which is currently has not been operating for several months and a good part of the time to now. It was a challenge, and it was not necessarily an economically, doesn't help the fish that much.
And I would like to
But that,
direct,
one of the things I've had to abstain because on this issue when it came up, because I have a property that looks out at rubber dam number 3.
So let me just capture what I heard. Number one is we're looking at a 2050 horizon, but we obviously have a longer term horizon to think about.
You should incorporate
Yeah.
some of the potential issues that you need to be addressed in a longer term plan.
Right. And that was one of the reasons why the 3 scenarios at the beginning were shown, because many of those scenarios, we don't know they're really going to unfold till later, but we need to consider those. So that was kind of the first point I understood. The second one is to have a contingency, as you've expressed it, as a scenario planning, as Director Sethy has articulated, how do we do in terms of seismic events that I think will also require the team not only to be looking at the sources, but also the intersection with the infrastructure reliability and the timing of some of those projects. And then the final point was the regulatory risk associated with these options.
Control. We like the word local control. In my mind, that's ownership. That we've paid for the South Bay Aqueduct, we should own it, possibly in a joint power authority with the other South Bay Aqueduct contractors. We should own the groundwater banks, including those in the valley, similar to what Irvine Ranch is doing now. Where you own the land, you control it, you're not relying on a farmer whether he's going to overdraft or not.
So then that goes to a preference for ownership.
How do you
Yeah.
own local control is ownership. We had the opportunity to buy the watershed, we failed on that. So it was not in our mindset. It's something we can hopefully put back in. Look at it in the longer term, that we should be owning South Bay Aqueduct. We should own the watershed for the N3 Ranch, 50-some thousand acres. It's part of 100,000 acres to be jointly managed by San Francisco, which has 38,000, and Zone 7, which has 5,000.
So I think the take home for the team in terms of characterizing the portfolios, local control can be the district owning it or be in partnership with a
It can
couple
be
other
part
water
of the
agencies.
JPA.
And we just need to articulate how many hands potentially are involved. Okay. All right.
East Bay Mud,
Director Gunther?
At the end of the day, we have to come to some consensus where a majority of the board agrees.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
two more quick ones. Enterprise opportunities should be recognized because we are the hub. One of I've asked that we add into a line to our potential revenue sources, the ability to generate money by becoming a water broker. We have that
Location, location, location.
Location is ideal for us. We picked up a couple of $1 million with some water banking in near Fresno. We exchanged with that was free money. We could be doing far more of that. We could take a look at a true enterprise district, Irvine Ranch, and start to adopt some of their practices and policies.
And your final one?
And desalination of the bay is an unlimited water resource, which trumps everything. If you have cheap power, reliable power. So those are longer term things that are outside of our current mindset, but we'll see where it goes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Gunther.
Oh, and you'd asked how to capture the stormwater?
I
You
did.
already mentioned that in the decree.
That-
Go
well,
upstream.
Pick it up in Sunol, Lower Bank. They've got some nice big pits they're building, and bring it down via the Niles Canyon Aqueduct. That could be just lowering the levee a little bit.
And that will be a
You'll
discussion for
capture
another
that.
time. Thank you, Director Wee. Director Gunther.
I want to clarify something from my comments in earlier meetings we've had. Bay water itself, direct desal of bay water may in fact be an opportunity long-term as we have these smaller nuclear power plants being built. But I was suggesting that the first available opportunity really is to put a desal facility next to the power plant near the San Mateo Bridge, which is in our jurisdiction of the Niles Cone Aquifer. We go up all the way on the west side of 880, up past the San Mateo Bridge. And so we can do brackish water desal in high volume, really close to the ocean, but not necessarily with the expense. And
And so-
that can be done short term in the next 25 years. You're thinking beyond that, yeah, I kind of agree with Director
So
Pete.
can I kind of bring us back a little bit? We're talking about concepts. I think staff is not presenting
Right.
tools under each concept.
But I
right?
think the point I take from that is that the sensitivity to power cost
Right.
should be reflected in the analysis, because of course, the
Okay.
environmental side of things will also be another factor.
I think you'd have a far easier time permitting with brackish water desal.
And a near-term opportunity is Hetch Hetchy Power, which is being sold by San Francisco at 10 cents a kilowatt hour to their other major customers. They're in the market for large customers, and it terminates within a couple of miles of the Newark desal plant.
Director Gunther?
I was curious where you were gonna come up with the extra desal water. I could, I agree with Director Sethy. I think there's some opportunities for brackish water by our location. Power concerns, the thought of small nuclear power reactors, of course, that's a great idea. That's how I feel about it, but I can guarantee you that's not how everybody else feels about it. And you're gonna have another problem, which is the brine discharge.
Right.
I mean, there's some problems with desal. I'm not a huge fan of the recycled water concept because of costs. I would hope people don't misread this here, because if you look at that, it could be construed to say, hey, this is a wonderful idea. Sure, we could do it. I'm willing to drink it. Most people aren't. But the cost of treating recycled water is phenomenal. There's no real science to it. You still probably have a brine problem, certainly a power problem. Bay water, once again, it's gonna take power. It's gonna take energy. It's gonna take a discharge for your brine. Environmentally, it's gonna be a tough sell. Conservation, I see it there, oh, great. However, once again, I hope people don't misread that to think that, oh, we can conserve our way out of this. Not so sure. So, I mean, I like the charts. I'm a little worried about the chart showing this that would say, people would say, oh, well, you don't need the state water project because you could use local surface water, you could use bay water recharge and recycled water. We could survive without it. The cost of that scenario, is my thoughts are pretty serious.
And in some ways, you really tee up part of what we're doing in the interim between now and the end of August is getting the cost information.
Yeah, and
Fortunately, when it comes to desal, you're not the first person. You're one of the first people to implement it successfully as you have the Newark desal. But, you know, there's been several regional desal projects that you've been a participant with. San Jose Water Companies has finished an evaluation. The Santa Clara Valley Water District's in the midst of another evaluation. So you're really standing on the shoulders of prior work to understand kind of the costs and the possibilities and the issues. So one of the trade-offs you're implicitly saying is that there's this cost versus reliability that you have to weigh. And there needs to be the characterization of the risk of are there differences in the kind of risks that we have associated with different portfolio compositions? That's another thing that would need to be characterized for you in your deliberations.
yeah, I'm like the concepts that we could try these things conceptually. I'm a little concerned that there are people out there that will look at this and say, well, you should just do that.
Now,
That's the answer.
Yeah,
I don't need the Delta Tunnel.
I've seen quite a few presentations from Cal DSAL and other seminars where they showcase some of the beneficial uses of brine, and where, like down in east part of Los Angeles County, they're trucking it to beneficial places. And so one of the things that I keep trying to explore, I'm not a know-it-all scientist, but to me, it would make sense to take a look at South Warm Springs, where we can feed the brine directly into the salt ponds, where there are beneficial environmental uses for that brine. So we need to keep an open mind here.
Right, and I think it's to some way, there's kind of a basic cost, and then there's gonna be a certain elasticity depending on power costs, depending on brine disposal costs, depending on how long the pipeline needs to run. So you need to know, are we in the ballpark when it comes to the cost versus reliability trade-off? Or how much would we need to see improvements to technology, regulations to make it even viable relative to the policy choice you have, which is this cost versus reliability
Well,
trade-off?
South Warm Springs, we also have really close access to the other Calpine power facility in Alviso.
Yeah, so again, the motif of power and the sensitivity, the overall life cycle cost of a desalination option to power as one of the factors. I think that would be helpful for us to present in our analysis of
And-
alternatives.
I think that's what you'll be bringing back to us, right? That's
Yes.
part of your evaluation about how you're going to implement these concepts. So just based on what you presented, I would like to carry recycled water forward as a concept. I am pretty sure Director Gunther is right, that it's going to be priced out just because of the cost, but I would still like to see it carry forward as a concept. In terms of what you're proposing, for the stewardship focus portfolio, I would rather expand the groundwater component and take out either SFPUC or state water project. This way it makes a little bit more cost effective. This actually leans it more towards affordability. I am wondering a little bit why state water project and SFPUC chunk is included in this particular portfolio. There might be restrictions on how much groundwater we could take out, and maybe that's what I'm not understanding, why it's not included in this chunk. But the preference was still, when I say local control, for me, it means water that we can use and readily accessible within our locality. yes, we could have water bank somewhere down south, but that water still needs to come back and there's no guarantee we could bring it back when we really need it. So for me, I am much more conservative in defining local control as what we could access within our geographical area. So different lenses. So I would like you to keep that concept in mind, and I would like to see if it's possible to tweak this portfolio a little bit to increase either the groundwater component. And I do have question for staff. When you say bay water, is only bay water desal. This does not include the expansion of the desalination facility, right? That is counted within the groundwater chunk? Okay, all right, then,
Groundwater includes a number of local desal, so it'd be expansion of our existing NDF, but also evaluating a second potential brackish desalination facility in another part of the system, including even expanded groundwater potential south end of our system.
okay. Then my comment stand, my preference definitely would be more to potentially expand our groundwater desal more than including the Baywater desal chunk, because I could see a lot of different challenges, but I am okay with you carrying it forward as a concept, and we could look at the different challenges and restrictions and limitations. I am hearing at least 3 director wanted to be carried forward, and I'm perfectly fine with that, and I'm actually looking forward to the analysis. But just one thing for the record, I know we talk about a lot about small nuclear power plants. Let's just be really clear. ACWD, at least this board of directors, is not endorsing building nuclear power plants. That's not part of what we're planning. That could be an opportunity if it happens, and we'll be more than glad to take advantage of it, but that is not what we're talking about. So with that, any other questions, comments about the different portfolios,
Well, I-
combinations?
We
Can I just
don't have
pause for
to
a second? I
endorse-
just want to ask
Hold
a
on.
We
question
don't
of the
have to
board.
endorse nuclear power plants to realize that
No, it just, we keep on,
Google and Microsoft and
They're
a
gonna do
lot of
work.
industry titans are pouring a lot of money into micro nuclear and not even fission, but
and that is,
fusion. So at some point, the market is going to offer capabilities
I
that
think-
we should be aware of. And we don't have to get into the politics of it at all.
and that's where I'm going to leave us. So Philippe, I believe you have questions for
I
me?
have a question simply because you've mentioned it a number of times, each of you, which is affordability clearly is a very strong priority and sensitive of your stewardship to your rate base.
John,
You talked about being priced
John,
out.
I'm not done.
And my question really is, have you operationalized what that means? I mean, what is that cost threshold? Does it translate to a certain rate increase below which you must stay? Is it a cost per acre foot? How do you operationalize when you're priced out? Because that really is the policy choice that resides with you.
That is actually a very good question, and I think that might be a good thing for the board to discuss on what would be a good point where we say it's affordable or not. Right, the board generally looked at it just based on, we talk about affordability whenever we talk about rate increases, right?
Mhm.
Perhaps you're right, perhaps it's about time for us to say, what does that mean? Right. I
I
believe
wanted to add-
Director Sethy has comment.
Yeah, I have some, I'll close with these comments. They're supporting what Director Weed is saying. First of all, we're informing people well out into the future that we don't even know, right?
Mhm.
About how we want to operate this water system. And so I think it's very important to document what our vision is for 2050 to 2100. What are some of the things that we looked at, and maybe comment in the present day about our feelings about what might be available, in the future. Number two, John and I are in harmony when we talk about trying to build in contingency plans for the future. And so I really want to see under what different scenarios we may have to pull the trigger as a contingency to expedite getting water here. And that feeds into the 2 major events that could happen to our district. One is, or 3. One is a major earthquake on the Hayward Fault, which could in fact impact the delta and the levee system. We'd be out of water for a while. The second, which I think is less commonly talked about, but I have presented it to the board here, are the history of epic floods in California. And we have data going back, 2,000 years on when these major events happened. The last one was in 1862. And the entire Central Valley, from northern Central Valley all the way down to Southern California was filled. Governor Leland Stanford at his inauguration had to go by boat in Sacramento. We lost millions of cattle and livestock and other things. And they have really good research down in Santa Barbara Bay, which documents each one of these events as the flooding brought all the debris out into the ocean, so they can study the geological eras. And so we came close to that a couple of years ago when suddenly Tulare Lake appeared out of nowhere, right? But if we had an event like that, that could certainly affect the Delta too.
Yeah. And what was the third scenario?
Hmm?
You'd mentioned you had three scenarios, the seismic, the flooding. You had a third one that you thought?
Oh, the seawater,
Sea level rise?
the salinity of the Delta.
Yeah.
With sea level rise. And I was showing our general manager an interesting study that was done going back to the founding of the state, where people were already measuring salinity in the Delta. And it was all the way on the east side of Delta, very heavy concentrations out in Stockton. And so there's been variability over the years, with the penetration of very saline water.
So those, your 2 points are document what we're going to be monitoring in the 2050 to 2100 period that might lead us into different directions, that document our thoughts on what should be monitored, looked at, that are potential triggers and inflection points as we think of 2050 beyond to 2100.
Yeah.
That was the first point, and then the second was consider these scenarios like
We may
what
not
we-
be mini nuclear plants over the next 25 years, maybe beyond that. So something to point out that we were thinking about this at the time.
I was a little negative on the recycling and the conservation and the Baywater. I think it's very important that they're there. Because if they're not there, future, somebody's gonna look at it and say, well, you didn't consider them.
Yeah.
You gotta keep it there, and you gotta keep it and consider it and cost it out and bring out everything about it, including the negatives. Because there's a lot of people out there that really believe just the positives. That's particularly with desal. I mean, desal's not new. I mean, cripes, we've been doing desal for, I don't know, ships, Coast Guard ships were doing it in the 30s or earlier. But depending on what type. Reverse osmosis has been since I know of, at least since the 80s. One question it's always being thrown around is, you don't have to answer this. It's just to say, it's a thought question that maybe it's a good time to ask. There's all this talk about salinity of the Delta going up with sea level rise. Has anybody really looked at the salinity level of the oceans, sea level? I mean, I've been away from my ocean engineering days for a long time. This is going to affect currents. Good. Yeah. The other thing is you're putting fresh water into the salt water, which should mean that salinity will go down, not necessarily up. So by what degree? I don't know. You're going to certainly have higher water, But what's the salinity level of that water gonna be? Do we have, has anybody looked at that? Or, is Scripps looking at that? I've never heard anybody, they all talk about it rising. Everybody talks, oh, the seas are gonna rise. But then they use the same numbers, it looks like, as what we have today. Are those numbers gonna be the same? Now, if they get into messing with currents, all bets are off. 'Cause then you got weather problems. I mean, that's serious stuff. You start messing with the Gulf Stream, you start messing with the stream, the currents off the California coast. And our 25-year plan,
Sea level rise is gonna impact the levee system.
oh yeah,
1,100 miles.
they got a plan for it.
Right, so we've looked at, obviously, California's looked at the impact of increasing chlorides, bromide, and the impacts on treatment and palatability of that, and obviously the structural integrity of the levee. But the question you ask, I haven't heard that discussed.
I don't know,
Yeah.
sometimes I think about it, I didn't sleep through those classes, I was almost unconscious. But from lack of sleep.
Yeah.
But there's so much out there. And you keep hearing about sea level rise, sea level rise, sea level rise. You do hear some stuff about currents and weather. Nice, thank you, because currents, if I remember correctly, it was all based on salinity and wind currents. Has anybody looked at that?
No.
I don't know.
Interesting question.
According to
completely out of
Google,
knowledge.
the answer is yes.
I'll make
Thank you.
some
Thank you,
brief
General
comments.
Manager.
First of all, this is a relatively short plan, 25 years. 2050 will be here before you know it. The Delta tunnel conveyance will not be in place until after this plan, until the end of this plan at the earliest. So the Delta's doomed. The Bay Delta plan is for 2035. They don't want to look beyond that. The Delta Master, former Delta Master, said the 2 feet of sea level rise, and they've lost it. The CEQA for the Delta conveyance is 10 feet of sea level rise at the Golden Gate. So at some point, without Delta conveyance, you've lost the Delta, and you've lost that as the State Water Project needs it if it's going to continue to survive, but that's beyond the 25-year threshold we're looking at. Recycled water makes no economic sense in the next 25 years. We've seen it at 3 to 4 times the cost of our other water supplies. We keep kicking down the road. For the purpose of this plan, it should be removed. The water, we should be putting, need to articulate and hopefully put in it that water will not be a development constraint in our community. Let the cities do the planning, but we will meet the water needs of the cities. That's been our policy to date, and hopefully that articulation will be put into the preamble of your plan. And we're not going to be priced out. The water is a relatively low cost commodity, particularly looking at other commodities in power and gas. And there is no scenario that we're looking at that water pricing becomes the issue. Seen Hetch Hetchy in 20 years go up 6-fold. And it may go up another 6-fold, according to one report. But water, people will pay for the water.
I will say that since I've been on this board, everybody knows that I have supported each study that we've conducted, like with USD, on recycled water. And I even recently supported the recycled project that we have going on with Dublin San Ramon. The reason I support it is not because I believe there's an economic case. I really don't. But I think it's very important to do the studies to showcase to people down the road what the picture looked like at every stage of evaluation. So I'm with Director Gunther, leave recycled water in there for the future, because you never know when the Regional Water Quality Control Board is going to, really lay down the law with all the sanitary plants in the Bay Area and try to remove all the nitrogen and the PFAS that's going into the water. And then suddenly we have an available recycled water source that we didn't really have to pay for. And I've talked to Thomas Nizor about this shift that I've had over the last year, kind of looking out at the future. But I would keep it in these latter two themes.
This is a 25-year plan. If you want to put it beyond 25 years, so be it. And what will happen in the long-term future, but it should not be in this document
It's been,
in our current 25-year plan.
it's been in our 15-year plan way back when we started.
Hold on.
And it's
this-
still 15
This
years
is
out.
this is just a concept. This is not our portfolio. This is a concept.
No, you want to take it
Very-
out. so
very
you don't
well.
Waste time.
At the very end, you
25
would have been
years.
taken out from our portfolio for the next 25 years. But right now, my understanding is we're just looking at the concept.
Right, we're just looking at
Right.
concepts. We are looking at 2050, but we're also instructed to keep an eye open for the future. Now, this particular slide we showed is really kind of thinking out what might happen, is my understanding, Thomas. This is what could happen as we look out to 2075 and so forth, that these scenarios could come to express themselves. And it really prompts two questions. Number one is, are we considering alternatives that can address these kind of shortfalls? And then the second, which goes back to the affordability and being priced out, you look at that first bar in scenario C, we have a 40% shortfall. And the question that gets asked is, at what point do you cover the scenario? At what point do you accept a situation? This is the point that got put to us with the wildfires in Southern California. To what degree do you size a system for what magnitude of wildfires? And to what degree do you simply say, we just can't do it that way? So I think back to the affordability, future scenarios. I think thinking about the scenarios is something the team is doing. I think those scenarios you capture are kind of cross-cutting because they're the water resource and kind of the system seismic reliability CIP types of stuff. So it's going to be interesting to integrate those two. But
Then
that
if-
question of the future scenario, covering that, but also the policy choice we'll need to make is an
And put it in a chart that says 2050 plus.
Mhm.
All of these charts, including the ones with recycled, have a 2050 by 2050. So it's beyond the 2050 timeline. It should be recognized in your charts. And it should not be included in the current planning documents as
Okay.
recycled water.
If I can ask the technical team just a question, is this clear in terms of the direction we're getting in terms of portfolio refinements, or are there follow-up questions you want to have to clarify for direction?
I don't think there are follow-up questions. I think what's kind of happening here is coming to terms with portfolios that you don't feel are implementable, and whether we look at them and show how they're not, or whether you say they're so non-implementable in my mind that I don't even want to see them. And I think the point that Directors Sethy and Gunther are making is we haven't evaluated, them yet. And so do you want to keep them in? They're saying yes, to show what the trade-offs are of something like that. Because could the recycle water project be done in 25 years? Sure. So it's technically feasible to do it. Now, would you do it? And we haven't talked about what order yet we would implement any of these, because that's another part of thinking about, would we start with recycled water if that was in there? Probably not, right? So I think we haven't even gotten into that temporal decision-making yet, which is still an option for us later. So I think the question that I would like direction on is, do you want to see those so that we can show what the trade-offs are for those types of portfolios that have recycled water, have Bay desal, so people can see when we come back here and we say, okay, you have this is the good part about it, this is the bad part about it, and then you're making decisions based on that analysis, then you can show, your ratepayers and the
And the
public
last-
why you
It's our
decided
public
that.
responsibility to do this.
In the last several years, we have done an analysis of recycled water, 3 to 4 times the cost of any of the other water supplies. It makes no sense. The analysis has been done. I encourage you to share, to have staff to share with you the analysis they did on it and why it makes no sense.
I have it, Director Weed, I do, and I think the question is, this is not me trying to force this down. I think it's We have some directors that have said, yes, we would like to show it still. And I think that's the
So
choice that
I
we're
am
looking
going to
at.
answer the question this way.
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes, because you have 3 board members that's interested in seeing the analysis, understanding that seeing the analysis does not equal that it will be implemented. Seeing the analysis just allow us to see the trade-off.
And knowing the sentiments of the missing director tonight, I think you would favor it
Yeah,
too.
you favor
Yeah.
carry it forward for the analysis.
Let,
Right.
let me add one point to the fact that will not be costed out. This district is one of 2 in the state that has a AAA rating from Moody's. 13 in the country. We have the financial wherewithal to meet whatever you come up with, then some. We have the ability to invest in water enterprise opportunities. Finances are very, very strong. You look at our debt ratio compared to other districts, we're among the strongest in the state. So finances is not a constraint. I would hope that you incorporate that and your planning scenario and constraints. Thank you.
If I could just make a note about how we're going to do the cost evaluation, maybe that will help a little bit.
Please.
Is you're right. I mean, you could pay for anything, right? But I think the question is why would you, right? Why? So you look at the trade-off, right? Of, is it worth that extra incremental cost for whatever the benefit may be? And what we're going to be doing when we look at cost is a comparative analysis against the portfolios. So while you
I
could pay
see.
for all of them, we're going to look at which ones are actually more cost effective than others. And then you'll be able to see that case being made.
Can I ask a question of staff? When you evaluate the state water project supplies coming into the district, I'm chair of the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority, and I'm intimately involved with the other 11-member board that's all debating these issues. So at some point, we have to make a decision as to whether it's worthwhile participating in a $20 billion project. And going up. I would not be surprised if it's 40 or $50 billion down the road. So I hope you will keep the cost of the project itself in mind and what the implications are if we don't have a tunnel and if we do have one. Because you're going to end up with 2 different prices of water. Because one is we're going to have to pay for the infrastructure of a new system.
Again, it's outside the scope of the time framework of this study.
No, because we're going to have to start paying on the project now
All right.
or in the near term.
So I believe staff has a comment.
It's a little outside of the specific box we're in, but I see the relationship. What I would say is if a opt-in, opt-out decision were to come up during this period, we of course would be tackling it. But we're not looking at that happening in the next 6 months. Leaning on history, the way we have handled the 2 times when we've been asked to opt in or opt out and make a decision on the state water project, we have pursued it as exactly that and evaluated it from the context of what is the margin if we do that, yes or no. As far as this study's concerned, it's kind of neutral on the project. It's also kind of neutral on the direction of the healthy stream, was it healthy rivers and landscapes or voluntary agreements? It's kind of a wash of what the delivery is. Until we know not only the cost of participation, but what an actual benefit is, we've just stuck with, we will assume the same reliability that the tunnel just provides resilience, which I think in the most recent generation, we've seen the rest of the state also kind of move toward that argument. Point out, we were 10 years ahead of everybody else with that. It served us well, and it really kind of takes us out of equivocating about that. It just gets into the position of, do you want to continue to depend on the state or not? We are seeing declining availability from the state that's primarily going to be driven by climate change and precipitation pattern change from snow to rain. Whether that's conveyed through, whether that lower reliability comes through a pipe or continues to come from the surface water in the near term is kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So it's, I don't know if this is making sense or not, but it's just outside of what this current process is. And we can certainly speak to it cleanly if and when that topic comes up.
I get it.
Is that, am
Yeah.
I making sense?
Yeah.
Any follow-up on that one?
No.
Okay.
Uh,
The point though that we've shared already is that the state water project reliability is declining. And that scenario C, beauty of having a PhD in hydrology and meteorology and climate is that we got a lot more ability to really understand this stuff. And those scenario Cs actually benefited from Dr. Zez's work on evaluating the more extreme climate scenarios. But that scenario C is built on real scientific data sets that are out there.
Uh-huh.
They're just pushing the envelope on the statistical probability of what climate change may do to the state water project. And that's why we're saying it's a great proxy. It's either more extreme 2050 condition or just a little bit into the future, maybe 20, 25 years. And I think, Tan, you said you're actually going to be trying to map out what that scenario C is looking like in terms of a year. So we really are speaking to what happens beyond 2050. We may not call it 2050 plus or 2100, but we'll speak to how we can use this study to evaluate, okay, maybe we're fine by 2050, but what do we need beyond 2050? And which of these portfolios that the team is putting together, how robustly do they stand up in that scenario C? Right. So when we look at these handful of portfolios, we're going to look at them at A, B, and C. And they may all look great at A and B, and some of them may look really bad at C, and some of them may look really reliable at C. And that'll help inform this board on, do we want to be thinking past 2050? Or do we want to build an implementation timeline that says, as we get closer to 2050, we should be continuing to monitor and shift in this direction? I'm just speculating where we may be going, but it's also not rocket science to kind of see that direction. So I don't know if that's helpful. It kind of encompasses a few of the comments that I've heard.
That's fair.
Make a quick editorial comment. Semi-tropic contract ends in 2034. Zone 7 and Valley Water are talking to Irvine Ranch about joining in with their project where they own the land, no capital cost. They just keep half the water that you run through the system. So the term general groundwater banking is still a viable option. There's land values of agriculture dropping in the valley. We have the opportunity to acquire significant groundwater assets in the valley, control it. So the general term of groundwater reservoirs outside of our current basin would be better to put in that context than focusing on semi-tropic, which is vulnerable.
It's not for debate tonight because it's not on the agenda, I don't think, but I've been tracking Sigma for a while. And Sigma is the fly in the ointment. 25 years ago, sure. Today, ain't gonna happen. Sorry.
Sigma is the salvation because it's the basis of a water market. Places to place a value at every wellhead. And we can afford to pay 10 times or to 100 times more than the ag interest for that same water.
Actually, that brings out a good question. I have a question for staff. So where does, these little chunks, where does semi-tropic water go? Does it go under the state water project chunk?
On the stacking bar charts,
Uh-huh.
it goes under state water project.
Okay.
It is the state's, it's project water,
Okay.
project water.
So groundwater banking is within that chunk. Okay.
Our existing use of groundwater banking, and I presume in our portfolios, when we evaluate additional groundwater
Okay.
banking,
Thank you.
it would be tied to the source of water that goes into that bank.
We have one other long-term opportunity, which is federal water.
That's under the additional.
And the South Bay Aqueduct Valley Water has 75,000 acre feet of authorization to bring federal water down the South Bay Aqueduct.
Where does that water fall?
And they're using about half of it.
Under the scenario that has additional imported water.
The
I think
green,
was-
a little
Okay,
green
the
bit
green
where it's
imported
not
bit.
current
So
imported
I've had
water.
a chance to talk in detail with some of the board members with Irvine Ranch and Zone 7. I support what Director Weed is saying, that we need to at least explore the opportunity to partner with a couple of other agencies here. And that's the west side of San Joaquin Valley.
We're talking about banking now?
Yeah,
or
water
going into
banking.
CVP.
It's not the more sensitive eastern side. It's on the west side. They picked out a good location and they're managing under their Sigma auspices to comply with the state. They're not under any mandates or anything.
So I guess the question for staff is, would additional banking opportunities be included under the state water project component? I'm being very fair here.
So it's kind of a,
Yeah, I mean, so there's lots of options, right? And
Right.
I think instead of sort of deciding which of those options is
Okay.
the best one right now, because it's so much about time and place, we're categorizing them as external banking opportunities, and that is included in some of the
Okay, I
portfolios.
just want to make sure that the director's
Yes.
comments
Yeah.
are addressed
Right.
and does not go too far. Bring it back to this. Okay,
Right.
so based on these bar charts, do you have any other questions or things you need from us?
I was just gonna share, what probably would have been helpful if we had listed up here or in your package was that original list of,
What's
what we
under
call,
which?
not strategies,
Supply options?
options, right? All of these things that have been brought up are listed as line item options. As a reminder with groundwater banking, and just to finish up what Persephone had said, is rather than look at every little bank that's out there, and they're mushrooming right now, is to evaluate what performance metrics, what would be the
Right.
desirable qualities in a groundwater
Okay.
bank that would more robustly help ACWD, and then say, go find a bank that's got these
Okay.
qualities. So that's the way we're approaching it.
great.
CBP is included. And then with regard to semi-tropic and the contract, maybe one helpful thing, scenario C again takes into effect
I
a
see.
credible risk of sigma constraints, just general operations of putting and taking, as well as a contract future, which
Okay.
we've mentioned before, which we can get too publicly involved with discussing, but we're assuming contract changes.
Okay, so my takeaway is all the risks that we are concerned about, the uncertainties for contracts, availability, lawsuits, are all those built into scenario C? Is that what I'm hearing?
I hate to say absolutely yes.
Most of
But a
most
lot
of
of the
it.
ones we mentioned, the
Okay.
semi-tropic contract renewal and Sigma are
Yes.
captured in
Okay.
Mhm.
scenario C, as well as more extreme climate change, which really maps towards beyond 2050.
Mhm.
We're
Okay.
using a more conservative outlook.
So what I'm hearing is staff is actually capturing all our concerns. It's just not reflected in the way we think. It's in the scenario analysis that will
Right.
happen in the later, and then some of our ones or potential supplies are buried in
Yeah.
these little chunks.
Yeah, I would say the main ones we've heard, it's true. I'd love to say, we got your back, don't worry about
I
it.
don't know what
but-
goes in everybody's
Right.
Gotta
mind,
be
but
It would-
Certainly, we haven't discussed nuclear options at all, no
No,
pun intended.
not.
So I'm sure there's some additional concerns, but we're just sharing the ones that we've
Right.
brought up and want to make
Okay.
sure that we understand that those are being captured in these.
That's a good double
Scenarios.
entendre of.
Yeah,
the-
thank you.
So I think it would be helpful for the next workshop if you remind us what's under each chunk, because I think we confused, well, at least I confused myself a little bit about where things fit.
Mhm.
So that would be appreciated.
And I think that'll be a lot easier for us to do once we actually go, because when we come back, we're going to have modeled the portfolios, so we'll have them better refined and we can provide a little bit more of those details. I think just the stage that we're in now is sort of trying to think, okay, how do we want to conceive of these portfolios and then get into the details? And we just want to make sure that we have portfolios that speak to all of you and represent differing opinions and ideas so that we're covering all of our bases. And then when we go in and do the refined modeling, we'll definitely have project inputs in order to do that. And when we present the portfolios to you and how they've been evaluated, you know, the basis for cost, all of those things will become, there'll be a lot more material for you to look at in advance of the
Can I
the
ask a
next
question
meeting.
about Woodward and Curran?
Sure.
You're the primary person assigned to this project,
Yes.
but is there a small team that's working with you that we're?
Oh, you mean just me? Am I doing all this myself? Yes.
Are you getting?
Don't look at any of those
Are you,
people.
no, are you getting input from other professional people at Woodward and Curran?
Yeah.
Because I know the reputation.
Yes, we are. So just because you see myself here, I am certainly not the one that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. I just get to come and talk to you guys. But like Chris, our PM, he's actually an expert in conservation and analysis, data analysis. And we have this woman, Dawn Flores, who's been working with TAN on doing the modeling and doing the inputs and the hydrologic analyses that goes into it. And we have all sorts of a team of what we call kind of our expert advisor panel. Of course, we have Philippe. You know, we make use of him too. He's a great resource for our team. And then we also have, yeah, a lot of folks that are within the company that have specialized expertise in recycled water or in desal or in groundwater. You know, we have folks that are on the team that have been helping you with Niles Cone, the work in the Niles Cone. They're part of this team and have been informing us too on the work that's being there, because we want to make sure that we're getting, you know, all of the pieces put together. And so, yeah, there is a large team behind me, I assure
Well,
you.
That actually makes me feel more comfortable.
Good. It does me too.
I think the public that we represent as well.
That's a fair question, but yes, thank you.
Well, I had one final musing before I turn it back to Persephone, and that's to your comment, Director Sethy, because I think one of the things I hear many of you articulating is we want to be able to kind of say, well, if power costs go way down, does that change the viability? Or this delta question, if delta costs quadruple, does that mean that some of these other portfolios become more attractive? So I think that's a kind of what if questioning you want us to have the flexibility
Right.
to be able to answer. So that's what I heard, and we'll note that. And with that, if there's nothing else, I'll just turn it over to
Okay.
Persephone for next
Go
step.
for it. Right. So now that you know that it's not just me that will be embarking on next steps. I wanted to just bring it to a close. We talked about this already. We've talked about options and strategies. We've talked today about portfolio themes and groupings. Indicated we have a lot of heavy lifting now to do, right? We've got to finish building these portfolios. We've got to model them and refine them and evaluate them and cost them and do all of those things so that when we come back to you in August, we'll be able to give you those details. And really our goal at that meeting is to provide you what you need to facilitate decision-making. This is not our decision to make, but it's our ability to give you what you need so that you feel that you can make the decisions that you need to make and give staff the input that they need to have in order to move forward. So that's what's coming up, just a small little meeting in August where everything gets decided. And then once we have that, we're going to move into thinking about the timing, some of this temporal stuff about when things happen and how things happen from an implementation standpoint. And so that will be captured in the draft. And so that would be the new piece that comes in once you see the draft, because you will have already been participating in the decision part leading up to it. And so that would be then in November that we'll be coming back. So we've got 2 more workshops with you. It's been my pleasure to see you all again. And I really appreciate all the input. It's been very helpful. I think we have a lot of good direction moving forward, right? Chris is nodding, so he's got all the notes. And with that, say thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I
Yes,
need a short break.
okay.
I know we have other business.
We do. So shall we take it's 7 o'clock. Shall we take a 10-minute break? 10 minutes. So let's
Okay.
come back at 7:10, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, it's 7:11 and the board is back from a break. Let's move on to the next item, which is general manager's report, please.
Well, do you really need general managers' reports from me? This is like our 3rd meeting in 3 weeks. Aren't you kind of tired of hearing from me? So I don't really have general managers' reports. I did just want to acknowledge the passing of Director Kohler's wife the other day. Certainly a surprise to us, heavy hearts here on staff, and I know on the board too. We have circulated a card, and we will be keeping our eyes open for services and things of that nature. And if we get that information, we'll be passing along to the board. Beyond that, I have no further general managers reports for this evening.
All right, next item is director's comment and or agenda item request. Director Sethy, I believe you have a report back for the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority meeting.
Did I really?
Uh-huh.
Put it on the agenda. It would be-
Sorry.
Would you like to postpone it
I
till next
ignored that
meeting?
part of the agenda. So we did have a meeting up in Sacramento It was a relatively short meeting because we had to do procedural things to close out our fiscal year, which ends at the end of June, and to start an audit process. And the board was acting as a clearinghouse for a number of documents that the executive director had to get done. The governor pretty much wrote the executive director's report because he had made an announcement on Monday. We were there on Wednesday about trying to kickstart the process of clearing out all the hurdles on getting this project off the ground. So I did attend the portion of the state water contractors meeting. Ms. Heides was there. And it was a good opportunity to network with folks and just catch up on the Delta Conveyance project. So that's it.
Thank you. Director Wee?
Yes, I attended, not on the agenda, but I attended an DCA Finance Design and Construction Authority meeting that same day in Sacramento. The takeaways from that meeting is we signed some major contracts with Jacobs and Parsons. The burn rate for DC Delta Conveyance Authority is going to increase from $35 million a year to $55 million a year based on those contracts as they start to ramp up the project. The project, they're out there still trying to find final buy-ins on the project where they're at 88% sign up now. They need another 12. Historically, that was the ag interest when they did the state water project 50 years ago. The Met came in and subsidized Kern County in order to get the state water project approved. The Met is not offering that same this time, so looking for additional opportunities.
I would like, oh, go ahead, John. Sorry.
There is something that I had not been fully aware of called Envision. It's like a lead scoring on projects that they do for capital construction projects. And Delta Conveyance is going into that. We have a public benefit amount in the current contract for Delta Conveyance, quite a bit of money. But public benefit has historically only covered environmental, not economically disadvantaged. It would take a change. However, this compatible study or methodology, which uses the same terminology as LEED scoring, does take helping economically disadvantaged communities. There's something called the SAFER program, passed in 2019, which programmed about $1.3 billion to help economically disadvantaged communities in the state. 2024, they published the list. State Water Resources Control Board from 2020 to 2030 is going to bring in something in excess of $1.3 billion to fund it. It's operated by the State Water Resources Control Board. UCUA, Alameda County Water District, is one of 6 districts that are working with economically disadvantaged communities, primarily in the San Joaquin Valley, and funded through this program. I've suggested that when we look at how we deal with the counties, which are showing us at the county level, county health department is responsible for maintaining reliable water supplies throughout the county. And this study of SAFER, SAFER, is an acronym, is for units of 10 customers or more. That is their responsibility. They don't necessarily have funding for it. Since the suits against the lawsuits against DCA, Delta Conveyance, are primarily from counties, Those are the deep pockets, not the environmental agencies. Maybe there's a point of negotiations here that we can help them out, and everybody walks away with something positive. So, and it's something, again, not in that purview, but for Alameda, since they now have it published and identified, it would be of interest to know which, if any, entities in Alameda County are on the list. If they are, what can we do as various water agencies in the county, all of which are AAA rated by Moody's, zone 7 through the Alameda County, which is AAA rated. I don't know that we have an excuse to allow that in our county. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weed. Director Gunther, comments?
I just had an addendum to my report.
Okay,
Which is
Director
important for
Sethy.
the finance team. So one of the important things we had to do is pass a budget for the new fiscal year beginning July 1. And we've limited our meetings to 3 or 4. We've really pared back from meeting monthly. And I think we're going to have the third meeting in October and then call that quits for the year. So we are well under budget right now. We have plenty of reserve money to pay for all expenses this year and probably the next year too.
Thank you. Director Gunther?
I don't really have anything to add.
Okay.
Interesting conversations to hear. But I probably shouldn't comment on any of them until an open session later.
Okay.
I would love to though.
So
Think of-
I am just going to close it up by making a few remarks on the passing of Mrs. Bernice Kohler. Former Director Marty Kohler has served quite a few years on the board and has contributed greatly to the board. In order for him to do that, Bernice is a very big part of supporting Marty to serve on this board. So in honor of Bernice's passing and in memory of her passing, I would like to adjourn this meeting, if that's okay with the board.
Wonderful.
Then I will call the meeting adjourned at 7:20 in honor of Bernice Kohler.